Hi there, my name is Sarah Moore. I am part of the Vantage team under the larger HHS umbrella at Montgomery County. I am assigned to support the Services to End and Prevent Homelessness Department, or SEF, with all things assessment and training related. Today, the short training is going to look at how to effectively assess transition age youth, or TAY, and how to use the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. The reason this training is being implemented is because there's been some recent changes to the CES effective February 1st, 2026. So we're going to look at those changes. We're going to look at some things in HMIS in terms of how to make sure households correct. We're going to look at the differences between the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT and the standard version of the VI-SPDAT. Brief review of the portion of the VI-SPDAT training video that covers TAY. Then we're going to look at the tool itself and how those critical items have functioned in our system. Lastly, we're going to wrap things up by looking at some general assessment considerations for working with TAY, how to be effective, how to establish rapport, etc. So first, what has changed? So this change affects people on the single side of our COC. So if you're a family service provider, there are no changes in terms of how you assess folks. If you're a single service provider, we are asking that everybody start using the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT for anybody ages 18 to 24. So the first step when working with anybody in outreach or shelter is to identify how old they are. Then you want to make sure HMIS accurately reflects the household composition. So on the single side, typically that's a single adult. They are not part of a household. Then you're going to go through your assessment process. So if somebody is a single youth, ages 18 to 24, you're going to be using the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT instead of the standard version. Same acuity scale procedure as before, and if you feel the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT is not accurately assigning your client to the housing they would need to be able to obtain and maintain housing, then what you're going to do is a regular full SPDAT. There's no change there. Because we are implementing this change, it means that anybody that was assessed previous to February 1st, that is between ages 18 to 24, and still in our system, needs the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT completed. We're asking that everybody work to get that completed ASAP. And then lastly, once the person turns 25, then you need to go back to that standard regular version of the VI-SPDAT and complete that, unless a full SPDAT's been done. Once a full SPDAT's been done, you never go back and do a VI-SPDAT. So where did this change come from? This change came from the Youth CS work group who made a recommendation that was eventually voted on by the ICH. This was not a Sarah decision to switch assessments, but rather a joint decision by the group tasked to work on all things TAY. And then lastly, just final reminder for family providers, there's no change in how your system functions. The remainder of this training is strictly for single service providers only. So age, family households in HMIS. On the summary page in HMIS, here's the tab. You're going to see your client name and it has their age. It calculates it for you once you put in their birth date. Easy peasy. So you can easily identify if you're working with a transition age youth and you need to use the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. The other thing you can see on the summary page is if the person is part of a household. So you can see our fake client, test client, right, is a 19-year-old and they're listed as the child of Test Testerson. So they are in a female single parent household. This means we need to break the TAY out of that household so that HMIS accurately reflects that they are not living with their parent anymore. So how do you do that? You go up here to the Households tab in yellow. Once you do that, the Households tab is going to pop up. Obviously, this is a zoomed in portion of that tab. And then you're going to see the household. Underneath it, there's going to be this button in purple, highlighted in purple saying Manage Household. Once you hit that, a new pop-up window appears and you can see everybody listed in the household. You're going to go locate your client, the 19-year-old, and go to this red minus button that's highlighted here in yellow, and you're going to hit that to remove the client from that household. A new pop-up window is going to appear in HMIS, and it's going to ask you for the date the client left the household. So you want to ask the client, when did they leave their parents' household, right? They may not have an exact date. They might say, oh, it was like April or May of 2020. I don't remember exactly. Then you could put in May 1st, 2020, because that's right in between that time frame they gave you. But perhaps the client doesn't feel comfortable sharing a date or they don't remember the exact date or year. Then what you're going to do is put the date they left the household as the day before they started with your program. So if today is February 1st and they're entering the shelter and they don't know when they left their parents' household, then you would put January 31st as the date they left their parents' household. After you enter the date here, you're going to hit save. Then when you go to the summary tab for your client, you'll see, okay, we have the client's name, their age, and then they're not listed in any household. You need to do this step, remove the client, break the client out of a family household before you do anything in HMIS, intake documents, assessments, notes, or service transactions, before you upload documents. If you do not, then all of that information you're putting for your client is still connected to the parent's household. So if that's person were to enter, it would look like they've been in our system longer than they have been. So now we're going to look at the key differences between the standard version of the VI-SPDAT and the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. They are pretty minor changes overall, and I have a couple different modalities that show how we're going to look at those things. So first off, when you start at question 1, there's an additional option of couch surfing. A lot of the questions are like this. They add an additional option that specifies something relevant to a TAY. So we've got couch surfing here. Number 4, they add an option of juvenile detention. There is an additional question that was added asking about incarceration when somebody is younger than age 18. This question, 15, is probably the most different when you're looking at the two scales side by side. So it roughly correlates to 14 here on the standard version of the VI-SPDAT. It asks about why somebody left a household. The standard version is a little bit more broad, and then the TAY really kind of focuses in on those things that could be the reasons why a TAY left their household. Again, we have an additional option. The TAY version was expanded a bit for pregnancy. So not only does it ask if you're currently pregnant, it asks, have you ever been pregnant or have you ever gotten somebody pregnant? So that widens the scope of who can answer this. Additional question about using marijuana before age 12. And then I've highlighted 27 here because this question roughly corresponds to these changes here. That's what we're going to look at later. So now we're going to watch a very brief video from an org code trainer that talks about the TAY.
To the transition age youth VI. This is version 1. I go as deep into this, but I do want to just point out some of the differences because the transition age youth is very similar to the single adult VI, but there are some minor differences as well. Administration, again, this is going to stay the same in collecting the interviewer's name and agency and where the survey is being completed, etc. Basic information, also the same. However, the change here is that you score a 1 for persons who are age 17 and under, rather than 60 and older. So we're looking at those unaccompanied youth that are under 17 as being more vulnerable. Okay, the addition in section A is for couch surfing for youth. So in addition to shelters, transitional housing, safe haven, we also have the choice of couch surfing because we know that many youth do couch surf, which could be a vulnerable situation that they're in for one reason or another. So if the person answers anything other than shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven, we're going to score 1. So even if they are couch surfing as a youth, we are going to score 1 for that. Question 2 and question 3 are the same regarding the length of time. The risks section, question 4. Addition of in item F, stayed 1 or more nights in a holding cell, jail, prison, or juvenile detention facility. Not much other changes here. Questions 5 and 6, no change. However, question 8, were you ever incarcerated when younger than age 18? So we're getting at youth that may have been incarcerated in juvenile detention facilities as well. No other changes on legal issues or risk of exploitation. No real changes on socialization and daily functioning as well. 11 and 12 are the same. 13 is also the same. Scoring is also the same, as is 14 for self-care. Scoring is also. Okay, there's a little bit of different wording on the relationships section. So question 15 is your current lack of stable housing. A, because you ran away from your family home, a group home, or foster care. Because of a difference in religious or cultural beliefs from your parents, guardians, or caregivers. C, because your family or friends caused you to become homeless. D, because of conflicts around gender identity or sexual orientation. And then if we're answering yes to any of those, then we're going to score a 1 for social relationships. E and F, because of violence at home between your family members. F, because of an unhealthy or abusive relationship, either at home or elsewhere. So the wording on these are slightly different in this section as well. So if yes to E or F, then we're going to score a 1 for abuse and trauma. Okay, the wellness question. Not many changes until we get to question 21. So question 20, I think it was question 20, and the other one was for female respondents only. 21 is, are you currently pregnant? Have you ever been pregnant? Or for gentlemen, have you ever gotten someone pregnant? So we're looking at vulnerability there. Yes, no, or refuse. If yes to any of the above, then we're going to score a 1 for physical health. Okay, a little bit different questions on the substance use section. 24, if you have ever used marijuana, did you ever try it at age 12 or younger? So we're looking at early substance use. So if yes to any of the above, then we're going to score a 1 for substance use. No other real issue or real changes on the mental health section. Again, if the respondent scored 1 for physical health and 1 for substance use and 1 for mental health, then we're going to score a 1 for comorbidity as well. So no changes there. No changes on medication. Medications doctors said you should be taking that you're not. Any medications like killers that you don't take the way they're prescribed or that you sell, if yes to these or any of these, we're going to score a 1 for medication. So no changes there. No changes in the scoring either. The transition age youth is very similar to the single, again, with some slight variations of the wording on some questions. Scoring criteria stays the same. Total possible points of 17. 0 to 3 is our no moderate or high intensity services at this time. 4 to 7 is long or time limited supports with moderate intensity or that rapid housing range. 8+ is long-term housing with high service intensity or that permanent supportive housing first.
So luckily, HMIS scores all of that for us. She was looking at the paper version of the VI-SPDAT, and that's what we're going to look at now. So this is the paper version of the TAY VI-SPDAT. So as you can see, I've outlined in blue where there's a change. So it's pretty minor on some of the items. Same thing if there's a new question that's indicated. This is the area where the changes are the most critical in terms of difference in scoring. Again, we've got some blue down here because the expanded pregnancy question. And then lastly, the final page has a new question. I think the really important thing to highlight, which the previous trainer did, is that the scoring ranges are the same as the standard VI-SPDAT. So 0 to 3 is a self-resolve, no intense supports or supports really given at this time. 4 to 7 is that rapid rehousing, time limited range. And then an 8+ is that PSH more long-term supports are needed to obtain and maintain housing. So now we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the critical items. So the youth work group subcommittee met and reviewed all these differences before electing to move forward with the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT, which is what I was talking about before, that eventually the ICH voted on. So what were we looking at? So the Youth Drop-In Center has been piloting using the standard VI-SPDAT and the TAY to see what those differences in scoring are, so we can get a sense of, is the TAY the best version of the assessment for our system? So one of the areas where we saw the most difference in scoring is if you look at question 14 and 27 on the standard or traditional version of the VI-SPDAT versus question 15 on the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. So 14 and 27 are pretty broad. There are some specifics, but it's kind of a more generalized version of the question, whereas the TAY version, the question 15, gets really specific. And as you can see, just like in the full SPDAT, the VI SPDAT is broken up into domains. So I did not say these are the domains. This is from org code. So org code is saying 14 is about social relationships on the standard version, and then 15, kind of A through D, is about social relationships on the TAY version. And then same thing, 27 is about abuse and trauma on the standard VI-SPDAT, and then it corresponds to E and F on the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. So if you answered yes to both 14 and 27, then you would have to have a yes up here and a yes down here to have that same score, to get the same points. That didn't always play out in real world data though. Some of that could be due to data errors where staff were completing the assessments on different dates and the client's life had changed in between. It also could be that the staff asked abbreviated versions of the TAY, like they went through the regular VI and then kind of like threw in the TAY questions. We don't really know what happened in the past. We can't go back with that. But those are possible explanations for the difference in scoring. The other possible explanation for the difference in scoring is due to the client's unique situation. So you may have a youth that got kicked out by their parents, and they might say yes to 14 and yes to 27 because they view being kicked out as a trauma. But they might only answer yes to 15C, right? Because your family or friends caused you to become homeless. But they wouldn't answer yes to E or F because there wasn't any violence at their home, or they didn't look at their relationship with their parents or adults in the household as like unhealthy or abusive, right? So they might have seen getting kicked out as a trauma, but not because of these reasons. So it is possible for somebody to answer yes here and maybe only get one yes there on the TAY version. So we looked as a group at all those differences to see what assessment we think is going to best capture the TAY's unique situation. And overall, it was the TAY version of the VI-SPDAT. So now we're going to look more broadly at some recommendations for working with transition age youth. The first recommendations I am providing are from the Youth Action Board. So I was lucky enough to meet with the YAB. They're the experts in their own lives, and their insights were really valuable. I'm so appreciative of their willingness to open their space to meet with me, to answer all of my questions about assessments. So one of their first recommendations was spend time getting to know the transition age youth and their unique situation. Don't make assumptions. You're not going to learn the sum total of what's going on in someone's life in the first appointment. The other thing to recognize and remember is that these questions can be quite sensitive for the young adult, just based on the fact that this might be the first time anybody's asking them these questions with the expectation that they're going to answer as an adult. They've never had to think of their life in that way before. It could be sensitive because they're ambivalent or not sure how to answer. They feel pressure, like they're going to fail the assessment. You also want to try to understand their family dynamics. So you don't want, again, don't make assumptions. You don't want to assume everybody in the household was a support or everybody in the household was unsupportive. You could have one parent that's supportive and another adult in the household that's not. Do they have siblings? What's their relationship like with their siblings? Is there extended family living in the household or nearby? Again, you're not going to find this out in one session with a client. You want to recognize how the TAY was providing support to their family and any ongoing responsibility they may have for their family members. Um, were they caring for a grandparent or sibling? And is the expectation that that's going to continue even though they don't live in that household anymore? Perhaps there's a language barrier and the parents don't speak English. And so the TAY was responsible for translating for them, and that might still be expected, or at least expected in emergency situations. So you need to understand how and what the TAY was doing to support their family in the past, and if the family members expect that support to continue. Again, you want to be aware of language barriers. So if you have someone at your organization that speaks the TAY's native language and you can pair those people up for assessment, it is going to be so much more effective than if you're using a translator. Obviously, translators have to be an option in certain situations, but if there's a way to try to reduce that so somebody's interacting and comfortable speaking with another person in the native language that works at your organization, please do that. Um, the other thing is translators don't always get it right. There's a lot of slang in a variety of languages, and that can be country by country. So, like, let's look at Spanish, right? There's words in Spanish that in one country is totally fine. It's just what you name something. But in another country, if you said that, there's like a sexual undertone that you're not aware of. And so translators don't always realize or get that right 100% of the time. The other thing is that transition age youth kind of have their own language that often interacts with social media. So if you're not curious about what they're saying, if there's some term they use and you don't understand it and you don't go look it up on Urban Dictionary, then you're going to be missing some key information when you're working with that TAY. You also want to ask about their past interactions with helpers. What went well and what mistakes happened in the past that you want to avoid? So if you, like me, are a social worker and the youth had CPS social workers come out during their childhood, then me saying, hey, I'm a social worker, my name is Sarah Moore, blah, 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 that right there could be triggering for them. So you need to recognize your place in the system and try to see what worked well, replicate that. What didn't work well, avoid that when you're working with that transition age youth. And lastly, these are bold. These are probably the most important statements to take away from this slide. So you want to understand that because of their age, the transition age youth will likely give you the benefit of the doubt that you know how to help them best. They might not feel comfortable disagreeing with somebody that's older than them. That can be based on societal expectations, cultural expectations, etc. So they're likely giving you the benefit of the doubt, and you need to be respectful of that. You need to make sure that you're understanding that, treating them with respect, and as an adult. They are the experts in their own lives, and you're giving them, you're empowering them to make decisions about next steps for what's best. Next, I'm going to share some recommendations that were presented from the Transition Aged Youth Focus Program providers. So who are those providers? So you have the Collaboration Council and right now Pathways to Housing DC, who partner together to run the Youth Drop-In Center. So that's why I was talking to get these recommendations, because they're working with transition age youth on a daily basis. So rapport building is key element to success when working with a TAY. So what are the components of rapport building you need to pay attention to? One, you're going to need to meet frequently when you're initially getting to know a client. So you need to get to the root of what's going on with that person, and that's not going to happen after one visit. You want to ask about their family, but don't assume reunification is the best option. So people left their household for a reason, and you need to understand what that is. It could be there was a misunderstanding between the parents and the youth, and there's a way that staff can bridge that gap. That's a barrier to coexistence, right? Perhaps the parents thought that the youth, once they turned 18, they should start working full time and contributing financially to the household. Perhaps the TAY had a baby, and then the family expects them to start contributing because now there's another mouth to feed, so to speak. So there's a lot of reasons why there could be a miscommunication, a misunderstanding. The TAY doesn't feel prepared to do what their parents are asking them to do. Um, there's also lots of other reasons why people left the household that could include some kind of trauma. So you don't want to assume reunification is the best option for that person. You need to get to know them to see what's going on in their unique situation. So you also want to ask about their life goals and don't assume that college is the best option or that they feel ready to work. So the key takeaway is don't make assumptions, right? We're going to keep saying that. Don't make assumptions, get to know the person. So when you're talking about their goals, you want to ask about a whole variety of things. Do they want to go to school? Do they want to go to work? Do they want to learn a trade? Do they want to start a family? You want to meet them where they're at. It's not your idea of what the best next step is, it's their idea of what the best next step is. One way to check yourself to make sure that you're being non-judgmental is if you're saying, well, they should be doing that. Oh, they shouldn't be doing that. When we get into should territory, that's being judgmental. So then you should pull yourself back and likely ask the person more questions to see what's going on, to make sure you're meeting them where they're at, listening to them versus inserting your idea of what the best next step would be. So you want to make sure you're asking the youth if there's anything they want to share about their sexual orientation or gender identity, but not in the first visit. And before you get into any kind of questions about sexual orientation or gender identity, you want to make sure the youth knows in advance that you're a safe, supported person. So how do you communicate that? You share your pronouns. My name is Sarah Moore. I use she, her pronouns, etc. You want to make sure the space you have is welcoming and has some signals that you and your organization support LGBTQIA plus community. That could be pride flags. If you're someone that works out in the community doing outreach, you might have a pride pin on a backpack or a t-shirt or something when you're going around talking to people, so they know in advance, hey, this is somebody that it would be open to having a conversation about my sexual orientation, gender identity, and would treat me with respect. It's similar to when you're having a conversation about substance use with somebody. You don't say, oh, do you like use drugs? Oh, and then, yeah, whatever you say, it's okay. Like we're harm reduction. No, no, no. You want to explain you're coming from a harm reduction point of view before you open the door to any kind of discussion about substance use. So you have to communicate all the time. You're a safe person for somebody to talk about sexual orientation, gender identity. And again, when you're having that conversation, you could just simply ask something such as, is there anything you'd like to share about your sexual orientation or gender identity? Anything I should know? Don't make assumptions. And then you want to be non-judgmental and open to changes that are going to happen in the TAY's life. So they're exploring their identity as an adult for the first time, and you should expect frequent changes in their life because during that time of exploration, that's normal. It's normal in the stage of development for there to be a lot of change and a change process to be happening. So again, you want to meet the client where they're at. Don't assume that yesterday is the same as today. So some more recommendations from the TAY Focus program providers. So you want to break topics up over several meetings. So you don't want to be rushing the client. You want to make sure you're remembering that at transition age youth, their brain is still developing. So they can't hold attention and process information the same way as a 30 or 40-year-old could. So you need to break things up over a variety of meetings. And again, that's why meeting somebody frequently when you're first getting to know them is really helpful. You want to orient them to the CS process. This is likely their first time in our system or their first time in our system as an adult. So you have to explain the COC, how it functions, CES. That is a lot to learn, and that's not going to happen overnight and in one visit. You want to normalize the completion of assessments. So you're telling the person, hey, I'm going to get to know you pretty quickly. I'll have to ask you some very specific questions. They're called assessments. I have to read them word for word. This is something we do with all clients in our program. I'll remind you about it at our next meeting. You want to make sure the TAY doesn't feel singled out, like, wait, assessments, why do I have to do that, right? And you always want to be reminding them if it's not happening right now, hey, this is something that's on the horizon for future visits. And you want to explain how they function, how the assessments function in terms of the CES and our COC. So again, major life changes are going to happen frequently. Assessments might need to be updated more frequently to reflect the client's current situation. That's fine if you're updating something more frequently. You just need to make sure in HMIS you're clearly documenting your reason for, hey, there's been a life change in this person's unique situation, so I need to do another TAY VI-SPDAT, or I'm updating the acuity scale to reflect this change. Motivational interviewing is a great methodology to employ when working with any client, but especially transition age youth, because this modality really does a good job when somebody's ambivalent or they're stuck between choices, helping them come to a place where they're deciding what to do next in their life. Adultism. So, per Wikipedia, adultism is a bias or prejudice against children or youth. So, basically, it's assuming that as the adult, you know what's best. Just because the TAY's brain is still developing and they're in a time of exploration doesn't mean you know what's best for the person. You always have to remember the TAY is the expert in their own life, and you don't want to infantilize them. You want to treat them as an adult. You wouldn't tell a 50-year-old you should be doing this and this and this is how you succeed, right? You shouldn't be doing that. So why would it be okay with a transition age youth? It's not. You also want to remember that youth are able to resolve their homelessness independent of the CES. This is something that is happening at the Youth Drop-In Center. They're working with youth to start developing a budget, start working, figuring out how room rental might work, or matching with roommates. So it can happen outside of the CS process. So that's an important thing to remember and continue exploring with all clients and especially transition age youth. So last TAY focus program recommendation. So there are a lot of behavioral health concerns that are apparent. So we have mental health issues that are often undiagnosed. So during the transition age youth time, ages 18 to 24, this is when symptoms often really intensify for things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So somebody, for example, might have had some depression in high school and then they turn 19, 20 and they have more of a manic episode. So for mental health providers like myself, it becomes clear, oh, hey, this isn't just depression, this is bipolar disorder. This is when psychosis or paranoia can set in for bipolar folks or people that have schizophrenia during this time. What is really important to know for transition age youth that have like significant mental health concerns. Research has shown that if you're helping somebody that's a TAY get help for their mental health, especially if it's a serious mental health concern, the earlier you get them help and the more intense the help is at the beginning, it sets them up for success throughout their lifetime. So you literally could be helping them with something that's going to have positive ripple effects throughout their whole life. So who wouldn't want to do that? So the TAY focus program providers have observed that mental health often is one of the underlying causes of the family misunderstanding that can lead to homelessness. Families maybe aren't equipped to support the person's behavioral health issues. There are a lot of cultural differences that could prevent the family from wanting the TAY to be diagnosed. Or maybe they can't access health insurance, and so there's no way for them to get formally diagnosed with a mental health disorder. So there's a lot of undiagnosed mental health issues that kind of have to be addressed for folks in this age group. So something to pay attention to make sure you're effectively supporting them if that is something they're bringing in their unique situation. Substance use can be very common. These are the substances that are typically used: marijuana, synthetic marijuana, alcohol, fentanyl. This is what's observed at the drop-in center. Just a note, a point of information, if somebody is under the influence, they don't allow them to participate in activities at the drop-in center, but they will make sure their basic needs are met for the day and kind of send them on their way. So if someone's coming in looking for hygiene products, use the bathroom, if they're trying to get some food, they can do that and then they're asked to leave the facility until they're sober. And then lastly, trauma is something that can be pretty significant for this age group. So it could be that there's trauma related to a family's reaction to somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity. It could be trauma resulting from child abuse. It could be trauma related from immigration. If somebody was immigrating from their home country to the United States, that can be very traumatic. It also can be traumatic if someone's reuniting with parents or family members here in the States that they haven't seen in 10 plus years. So the mom or dad may have moved to the US 10 years ago, and now you're 17, 18, 19. You finally moved to the US, you're reunited with your parents, but they haven't been your parents for over a decade, not in person. And so you're trying to navigate this situation. It can be very stressful because the TAY has expectations, the parent has expectations. They don't always match up. Sometimes there's a ton of pressure for the TAY who's just arrived here in the US to start earning income to help support the household. They might not speak the language. They're literally orienting to a new country. That is a ton of pressure. And then sometimes that can lead to homelessness or housing instability for the youth. There's tons of other things that the youth could view as traumatic that I'm not listing here. The important thing with trauma is if you're talking to any client and they describe something as traumatic, you believe them. You don't question it. It might not be traumatic for you, but it is traumatic for them, and therefore you need to treat it as such and make sure you're supporting them through some kind of resolution for that trauma, whatever it might be. So if you remember, I was talking earlier about how you want to make sure you're communicating, you're a safe person for somebody to share their sexual orientation or gender identities with. Now we're going to look at specifically why that's important. So I'm going to share a few slides from the Trevor Project. I am a certified Trevor Project trainer. This is part of the information that I learned about through that certification process. So the Trevor Project is the leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQIA plus youth. Their goal is to make sure every LGBTQIA plus youth has a bright future for themselves, has a happy and healthy life. So if you look broadly at suicide in the United States, it is increasing. So from 2000 to 2021, the suicide rate overall in the US has increased 37%. It is the third leading cause of death among youth ages 15 to 24. And LGBTQIA plus people are 4 times more likely to seriously consider attempting suicide than their straight or cisgender peers. That means for that in the US, roughly 1.8 million LGBTQIA plus young people seriously consider attempting suicide each year. So an important thing to consider when reviewing those statistics about suicide in the United States is that LGBTQIA plus young people are not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Their risk rather comes from how they're treated, how they're discriminated against by those around them, by society. And the positive takeaway that the Trevor Project has discovered is that LGBTQA plus young people with at least one accepting adult in their life report significantly lower rates of attempting suicide. This can be you. The fact that you're there being non-judgmental, accepting of all of their identities could save that person's life. Who would not want to do that? So this is why making sure you're communicating to TAY, a transition age youth, that you're accepting of all gender identities, sexual orientations, and any identity really that they want to bring forth. That means you can be supportive, actually save someone's life by being accepting of who they are as a person. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, my name is Sarah Moore. I'm part of the Vantage team and I support SEF and all things assessment and training related. I do have assessment office hours every Monday from 2 to 3. That's a time where you can drop in and ask me a question about anything assessment related, training related, mental health related. And then you also have my email and my work cell. You can text the work cell if you have questions or give me a call. I'm happy to try to find a time if the Monday through 2 to 3 doesn't work for you to find an alternate time for us to meet. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to attend this training. I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.